Hey guys, it's Kevin with my review for Last Night in Soho, and this of course does center on the character of Eloise, or Ellie. She is this aspiring fashion designer. It is basically her hopes and dreams to really become one of the greats, but she also is very much into 70s culture and, into 60s culture, especially with London. And when she's given the opportunity to go to London, she decides that she is going to move to this house that's kind of been abandoned, but it's this house that basically is looking for a new resident. And once she does settle into this house and falls asleep, she finds a way to where she is now connected with the 60s. And while at first it is this very sort of luxurious and very dreamlike sort of encounter, a lot more darkness does start to loom, and Ellie starts to realize that there is a lot more going on here than she really did think. So Last Night in Soho, I was absolutely hyped out of my mind for this film. I mean, look, Edgar Wright, I think it's, everyone will agree, he's absolutely one of the best directors working today. He's a true visionary with pretty much whatever he ends up doing. You know that it is going to be something really great. He just, the type of films that he, the Edgar Wright as a director, he has such a specific style, and it's so easy to pinpoint, and I would just really, always get excited when he has something out. But especially knowing this was going to be more of like a psychological horror film, I was very excited to see how he was going to handle that. I didn't really know how that was going to turn out for me because he's never really done anything quite like that before, and so I became more increasingly excited for it as we got closer to the film. The trailers I thought were amazing. I was so hyped to see how this film turned out, and thankfully, this film really did deliver for me. This is truly a very ambitious and different type of film than I think, we've ever seen Edgar Wright really do, but a really daring and I think very important one at that it really does show just how much of a mastercraft of a director that he really is. But we are just getting into right now. Look, one of the biggest parts of this movie, and I think something that immediately people are going to be interested in, is the cast here, and they absolutely deliver in pretty much every sense of the word. I think even if you don't like this movie, because I know this film wasn't necessarily polarizing, but I think people have very strong opinions on this movie, especially those that don't like it. I think no matter what, you cannot dispute just how incredible both of these performances are, but especially when it comes to Thomasin and McKenzie, who, look, she already has shown how much of a star that I think she really, how much talent she really does have, and, has demonstrated that she is a really great actress when she has the proper role. I really don't think she's ever given a bad performance before, but this film shows that she is 100% a bona fide movie star, and I absolutely loved every second of what she was doing. Ellie is very much an audience type character, but she's also a character you are endlessly finding yourself rooting for. There's so much that Ellie just wears on her sleeve. She doesn't let any of the sort of, she doesn't let any of the naysayers that don't really understand her passion really get the best of her, and you really do see how she kind of like wears her heart on her sleeve, but you also see how how just shaken up she is when she starts to realize, what's really going on. This really makes her question her worldview and the way that she really does, look at things. And I thought she just did such an amazing job throughout this entire film, especially, as we get further along, she really just does such a great job of representing the terrifying nature of what's really happening to Ellie, what Ellie's really going through. All of that was conveyed so well in this film. I don't think there was a single false beat when it came to her character. You really understood everything that she was going through, and every mannerism and things like that. It all just felt so real to me, and I really loved what she was able to do here. She completely commands the screen every single second that she's on, and like I said, I think after this film really just shows how much of a star that she really is. I think McKenzie already is someone that people were really looking at as like she's going to be the next big thing, but I think this film is going to put her on the map in a much bigger way than she has been in the past, and I'm very excited to see what she does here moving forward. Without a doubt, I think one of the best leading performances I've seen all year for sure. But also really great here is Anya Taylor Joy, who does play the character of Sandy, who I can't really say too much about what's really going on with her. But look, Anya Taylor Joy, another one of those actresses where you know she's probably going to be great in whatever she's in, and that is no exception here. But what I really like about the character of Sandy is that I think Joy does a great job of representing this woman that is just a very complex character. Sandy starts off and you think you understand who she is, you think you understand what's going on with her. She seems like sort of like this wide-eyed, like ingenue of sorts that really is just trying to get her name out there, trying to become, trying to achieve, a goal in life, but things really do take a turn and her performance kind of changes as a result. And I think that's what made Joy's performance just so utterly perfect in that way. I loved everything that she ended up doing within this movie. There's one scene especially where it's just so heartbreaking, but also kind of horrifying to watch, and the way that she ended up portraying this I thought was so well done. You really understood what they were trying to go for when it came to her character, and I think the contrast between these two, especially acting wise, there's very similar acting choices going on here, and I think that was a very smart move. These two, they don't share a lot of screen time together, just because of what's really going on, which you've kind of already seen in the trailer, how that's all working out with how Ellie, ends up in this environment. But whenever they are on screen together, it is amazing to watch. These two are absolutely one of the big highlights of the entire film, and I think if the film simply would not be as good if it wasn't for their amazing performances here. But the rest of the cast also does a really great job. Matt Smith, I think, really gives a performance that we don't normally see him give. Yes, he's very charismatic. Yes, he's very charming, but there's a other side to him that we haven't really seen before, and I think he tackles it honestly very well. I want to see Matt Smith play more of these type of characters because I think he really does impress in this role. I think he really does show his range in this film, and I don't see him in a lot of movies where I'm like, that's a really strong Matt Smith performance, but he is really great here. Michael Ajao, I thought was really good in this film. I've never really seen him before, but I really hope we're able to after this film. I think that he definitely shows a lot of promise here. He is a very, very likable in this film, and I just overall really liked what he ended up doing. Terence Stamp, not in this movie a ton, but whenever he's on screen, he is just incredible to watch. He's, again, such a he's one of those actors that really just kind of commands the screen whenever he's on. But the one performance that really stuck out to me in the way that I really didn't expect it to was Diana Rigg, who I can't say too much about her performance at all, but I'll just say she had a lot more screen time than I expected her to. I really thought this was going to be more of a minor role, but she plays a much more significant role in the film than I really did expect, and I think she gives such a memorable performance. And I have to say, for what I think is her last performance, because of course she did unfortunately pass away, this is a really strong note to go off on, and I really loved what she ended up doing in this film. There is a lot of difficult material that she has, especially in the, as we get further along into this film, but she really chews up all of the scenery, and I was just so utterly blown away by the performance that she gave here, because like I said, I did not expect her to have as much screen time as she really did, but my god, she killed every single second of it. Like I said, really this entire cast, I think everyone really does deliver. I don't think there's a single false performance. I don't think there's a single actor here that wasn't on their absolute A game, and I really just found myself so impressed by everyone. But now let's get into Edgar Wright's directing, because that's the thing that I think is very interesting when it comes to this film, because really, I mean, going into this is unlike anything he really has done before. And don't get me wrong, there are still aspects of fun to be had in this movie. There are still aspects of comedy in this film. It's much darker than what you're used to, but I think Wright still does a good job of having some sort of familiar, he does a good job of familiarizing you with what you expect from him, but also really challenging himself, going down a much darker path than he usually does. And honestly, he really does kill it here. I loved how much he leaned into the darkness of this film, how much he leaned into the psychological aspects of this film. This film is honestly very different, especially for a mainstream horror movie. This is a very weird film, and I really love the way that he ended up directing it. It's very artsy and has this very sort of eerie tone throughout, and I think it works very well here. Edgar Wright really did try to do something different, and I think it honestly really did pay off. I will always, and I've said this before, I will always admire a director that tries to challenge themselves, that kind of steps out of their comfort zone for a bit and really tries to tackle something different, and I'm even that much more impressed when it actually does work, and thankfully, this very much does work. This is such a bizarre film, but he does such a great job, I think, with directing this film. Like I said, starting off kind of lighthearted, but getting a lot darker and honestly pretty terrifying as it goes on. I really loved what he ended up doing here directing wise, and I do think overall he has a real future. Like, if he wants to continue doing horror movies, I am more than down to see what he is willing to do. I am more than willing to watch whatever he is willing to churn out. I mean, I already was, but especially after this film, he really does show that he can do anything, and I really love what he did here directing wise. But getting into the screenplay here, that's another thing that works very well within this movie, is that, you know, the premise of this film is already one that is very unique. You want to know more of what's really going on here, and I will say this film does require quite a bit of patience, because it does take a long time to really get you to understand what is going on. But what really, I think, helps the film are the characters here. All of the characters are very well written, and they're given a lot of depth. Ellie, I think, is one of the most likable protagonists that I think we've seen in a film in quite a bit, because this is someone that she has these big dreams, and she really, you know, is doing whatever she can to make sure that it happens, but she also has this passion, this passion that really drives her within the 1960s. She's just as passionate about the 1960s as she is with fashion. And I think that's something that's very admirable. I think we all have that sort of part of our life that we like to latch onto, and we're like, wasn't that so much better? You know, wasn't that such a fun time? And that's something that Ellie really likes to do in this movie. She likes to pretend that she's in the 60s. She likes to act like she's in the 60s. And yes, she's ridiculed for it. Yes, some people don't really take her seriously for it, but she doesn't care. That's who she is, and that's something that she really does sort of embrace as this film goes on. And so yeah, obviously we want Ellie to succeed because we understand her passion and that she wants to become this fashion designer, and we really do want to see her make it. But I think what really makes us cling onto her character is the naivety she has when it comes to nostalgia. She looks at it pretty much fully through rose-colored glasses, seeing it as this amazing time period where nothing really went wrong, and really ignores some of the imperfections that were going on within that time. And when she starts to, you know, become more aware of it, it really starts to mess with her, and you start to see how this really does start to take a toll on her overall. And I thought the film did a really strong job with that here. But then in contrast, when it comes to Sandy as a character, this is someone that, again, is kind of a blank slate. You don't really know why we're following her. You don't really know what's going on. You see that Ellie kind of like idolizes her, but similar to, you know, the time period, there's a lot going on behind closed doors. There's a lot that Sandy is keeping from other people. There are reasons why Sandy acts in the way that she does, and I think that's something else that is so well written in this film, is the contrast between these two women. You know, it's really interesting to watch, and I can't get into too much of what's really going on there, because it does kind of spoil, you know, what this film is really all about, what they're really trying to get at here. But I think they did a really great job at portraying someone like Sandy, who seems like this woman that completely has her life in control. She has everything that she's wanted, and then we start to realize that that's not exactly the case. And I think that's something that they did a really great job, and especially writing it like a horror film, I think was definitely the right approach, because you can see just how much this really just kind of shakes up Ellie, and what this really does to her as a result, and the way that this really starts to consume her entire life in such a negative way. It's so interesting to watch, and I think they did such a great job with that. Something I was honestly very impressed by, though, is that it actually does take a while to get to the 1960s stuff. For the first 30 or 40 minutes, we're really just following Ellie and her going through college and her trying to become this fashion major and people not really taking her seriously and her not really feeling like she fits in with really anyone except for Michael Ajao's character and the relationship that they end up forming, which is pretty sweet. But eventually we do get to, and I think what works so well about this is that it really draws you to Ellie's character. So once we're in the 1960s and we start to go down more of this mystery route, we are that much more drawn into it, not just because we want to know what happens, but we want to see how it affects Ellie. And I think this film does a really good job of achieving that. I think far too often I have watched movies where they are just so eager to get to the good stuff that they really skip through what's important, and this film does not do that. This film understands that Ellie as a character and our sort of connection to her is just as important as us understanding what's going on within this world, and I think that's something that was just very well written here. I really love the way that both Edgar Wright and Krysty Wilson-Cairns, I think they both did such a strong job in telling this story, and again, the way that things really do get more complex and weirder as the film goes on, and the pieces fit together in a way that you're not expecting, I think is really well done here. I also gotta say, I found this film to be highly unpredictable. I mean, there were so many directions going into this where I'm like, I think I know what's going on here. One in particular, I was so confident that they were going to go down this path. And if they did, I wouldn't necessarily have been upset. I just would have been a little bit annoyed that they took such an easy route, but they didn't. They actually did something that I was not expecting, and it made the film that much better as a result. I like the fact that they went down some different directions, especially where the film ends up going in the third act. Not really what I was expecting to happen, and I think it really kind of recontextualizes the film in a very interesting light, and that's something I really did appreciate when it came to the screenplay here. So overall, I think just rock solid when it comes to the writing in this film. I think all of that is very well done here. Let's talk about the cinematography, because that's something you can always guarantee is going to be a huge standout no matter what movie Edgar Wright is doing. And I mean, again, just the look and feel of this film, it has such a specific sort of stylistic choice to it, and I think it is so well done in that way. This honestly might be his most colorful film yet, especially when it comes to the 1960s. I mean, everything looks so glossy and dreamlike and perfect. It really just feels like you are plucked right into there, and I really love the way everything just popped in terms of color, the way everything looks. I mean, you can understand why Ellie is so obsessed with this. This feels like, this sort of paradise of sorts, and I think what's so great about the cinematography is when we start to dive into those darker elements, those sort of colorful things, they don't go away, they just have a whole new meaning to them. And I think the cinematography here, it's just so well done. I love the way everything is filmed here. There's a lot of things in this film that I generally don't know how they did it in the way that they did. Because, I mean, a lot of what's going on here, these aren't like special effects and practical effects and things like that. If you've seen the trailer, you know how Ellie is brought into this world, and there's one shot in particular that they do, and I don't know how they pulled it off. I really don't know the mechanics of it all, and I don't really want to, because it makes it that much more impressive. I like that there's a bit of a mystery there, and I think it's just really cool the way they were able to put it together. There's one scene in the third act as well. I don't even know how they came up with it in the way that they did, but it is so brilliant with what they decided to do. I think just the look and feel of everything, whether it's the real world or the 1960s, all of that is so well handled. This film is so stylistic, and like I said, very artsy in that way. Wright really did challenge himself to make something really different, and I think Chun Hoon Chun as a cinematographer as well, really did go the extra mile, and I really love what he ended up doing here in terms of visual effects for this film. in terms of the cinematography for this film. The score as well here is fantastic. Obviously, the soundtrack is killer. It's Edgar Wright. You know there's always going to be an amazing soundtrack here. And, I mean, yeah, that does not disappoint. I've been listening to this soundtrack a lot. There are some songs that I've never really heard before, and I really did appreciate that. I like that Wright didn't just pick, like, obvious 60s songs. He really thought carefully, you know, what are the songs that Ellie would listen to realistically, and I think there were a lot of really clever needle drops throughout this film, but the score that Stephen Price composes as well is fantastic. I really love what he ended up doing, especially, you know, when the film gets more into the horror elements. The score really does help you know, elevate those moments, and I think he did a really strong job with that. But the sound design also is something I do want to touch upon, because something this film I think did that was a very interesting stylistic choice is the first 30 to 40 minutes, as I said, it's mainly just Ellie's, you know, mundane life and what she's really doing, you know, in that given moment, and how little respect people really do have for her and whatnot. But then, and because of that, you know, Edgar Wright made this decision where the first 30 to 40 minutes of the film, the audio levels are significantly lower than you would expect. And you'd think maybe there's something wrong. And I didn't even notice this, but once we get to the 60s, he like cranks it up and the film is a lot louder after that. And I just thought it was a very interesting choice in terms of sound mixing, but it really made the film that much more effective. I mean, again, how many directors do you know that put that much thought into things, that they're willing to literally, you know, mess with the audio levels and confuse viewers that something might be wrong with their theater, that maybe they're playing it at too low of a volume, when that's actually the choice that Wright ended up going with. And I thought it was a very smart one at that, because it really does feel like the 60s as a whole, it comes that much more alive in that way. And I think the film just, it's a lot more lively and things like that. So I really loved that choice. I thought that was a really smart idea. And the editing, this film is almost 2 hours long, and I gotta be honest, I never really felt the length at all. I was very into this movie. It's one of those films where you really can't take your eyes off of the screen because of the way this film is playing out. I think this film always interested me. I never was bored or anything. I think overall this film was very well paced for the most part. But I will say, this film is not perfect. This is definitely one of Edgar Wright's weaker films, but it's not saying much because I still think it is a damn good movie overall. But if I had to be honest, I do think it is his weakest film so far. My only real issues with this movie, I would say, is one, Michael Ajao's character. I already talked about him. I really do like him in this movie. I like the relationship he forms with Ellie, but there really is not a lot to him as a character. He really is just here to be this supportive guy towards Ellie. He always sees the good in her. He's the only one to really give her, like, that respect that she really does deserve. He's sort of like a contrast of some of the other, you know, male characters we see in this movie. But other than that, there just wasn't really a lot to him. And there's a specific incident that goes down in the film that I think they should have touched upon a little bit more. And I think if they would have, it would have made the film that much more effective. We could have dived a bit deeper into his character, but the film just never really goes there. And it's, again, I enjoyed his character a lot. I just wanted a little bit more from him, and I think it would have been that much more effective overall. Also, there's this group of girls that constantly are bullying Ellie in the film, and they really just don't, and it's not that I don't like that they're in the movie, because I understood why they're here. I just didn't feel at the end of the day they served all that much of a purpose. They really are just kind of here to constantly belittle and just make fun of everything that Ellie's doing, and I wanted a little bit more when it came to those characters. I think there was an opportunity, especially with one of them, to dive a bit deeper, and again, the film just never really went there, and I was just a little bit let down by that. I was like, what's really the point of these mean girls? I just didn't really understand that overall. And the third act. A lot of people have talked about the third act in this movie and how it ruins the entire film and how it's a betrayal of everything we're setting up. I would definitely not go that far. I'll say that right now. There is no way I would go that far at all. I have seen this film 2 times. I will be honest, at first there were certain directions that characters took, certain actions that they take that didn't make sense to me. I was like, no, this doesn't work with the story that you're trying to tell. But then I rewatched the film and I understood a lot more what they were trying to do. So story-wise, I don't really have a problem. What really is the issue for me is that the third act of this movie, this is such a weird and like artsy film, and it's done in such an interesting, it's done in such a stylistic manner. You get to the third act, it just becomes a little bit more traditional, and I just don't think it blends quite as well as Wright really thinks it does. I think he had a really strong ending, and I think there's a lot of really great ideas throughout this ending. I just think the way that it was presented, it just felt a little too traditional for my standards, and I don't think it blended quite as well with the rest of the film. But with the way everything wraps up, it really isn't too much of a complaint. I just think that maybe one more draft or so, I think that third act could have been even stronger. But overall, I mean, I really can't complain here much at all. Last Night in Soho very much did deliver for me in the way that I wanted to. Thomasin, McKenzie, and Anya Taylor Joy give such powerhouse performances, as well as Diana Rigg, who I was not expecting to do as much as she did for me, but she really gives a strong supporting turn here. But it's also such a daring and different film from Edgar Wright, who really does show that he can direct anything and the true potential that he does have, and shows a new side of himself that we really haven't seen before from him as a director, that I really hope we do get to see more of. It's a film that really does go in some very weird and odd directions, but it also has some really great messages about nostalgia and clinging on to a dream, and not letting that cloud everything that you do, and going for your passion, and deconstructing two women in very different time periods. I think all of that is very interesting here. It's got a killer soundtrack, some truly gorgeous and just stylish cinematography that really just elevates the entire film and gives it a life of its own. As I said, this film is imperfect at times. There definitely are some flaws here and there, but I think at the end of the day, it's another great example of just the kind of director that Edgar Wright is. I will, no matter what, always be a supporter for his specific vision, how creative he is, how artistic it is. That's all still things that you can find within Last Night in Soho. The attention to detail that he has, none of that has really faded away at all. That is all very much still present here, and Wright is still very much one of the best directors working today. So to that end, there really isn't too much that I can complain about when it comes to this film. I do think it gets conventional in quite a few towards the end, and I think there's some characters that are a little bit underwritten. But other than that, I really can't complain all that much. I, for the most part, really did love Last Night in Soho, and I am going to give it an A-. But over, guys, in my review of Last Night in Soho, the amount you guys saw this movie, lift your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.